August is finally here, and you know what that means. It is college football season. Yeah, we still got MLB going on, but once that calendar flips to August, it's time for college football. We're only a few weeks away from our first college football Saturday. If you're new here, my name is Michael Fordham. You can follow me over on Twitter at Fordham Betting. Deep in the weeds of Major League Baseball right now, but last year in college football, hit at a 55% clip and netted over 27 units. So I would consider college football my bread and butter, and I'm going to be making tons of content here throughout the season. So subscribe here on YouTube. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to leave a like and then comment if you have any agreements or disagreements. I love talking college football. How this video is going to be structured, we're going to start off with the ACC. I'm not huge into just spraying the board with, season win total bets and, a bunch of conference futures. But with that being said, I do have 3 bets that I've already made here preseason in the ACC, 1 conference future and then 2 season win totals. I'm going to go ahead and just share those with y'all right off the bat. And I'll explain each of those. My normal scale is 1, 1.5, and 2 units. But for these preseason bets, all are going to be less than 1 unit plays. Like I said, we're going to have plenty of action across the board throughout the season. So that being said, let's get right into it. I'm going to go ahead and start off with who I'm going to tell you I think is going to win the ACC. So it's my 1 future here preseason. Who's going to win this conference? I'm rolling with North Carolina State. Getting them at plus 830. I mean, that is absurd to me. So we're going to risk 0.3 units to win 2.5 units on this. Plus 830 is just absurd. I mean, Clemson is, minus 120 to minus 140 to win this conference. And I get it. They've been really good over the last decade. But listen, this is not the same Clemson team that they've had with Deshaun Watson, Trevor Lawrence. I'm going to go out on this limb and say that I think North Carolina State goes into Death Valley and beats Clemson. I really do. This North Carolina State team, we'll get to the offense in a second, but starting off defensively, I mean, this is a defense that was, top 15 overall in the country last year. How many people do you think truly know that? I mean, people who bet college football focus on quarterbacks and, wide receivers and all the flashy things. This is a really good North Carolina State defense. They can get after the passer. Very reliable in the secondary, but most importantly, they can stop the run. And they've got 2 really experienced linebacker pieces coming back, led by Peyton Wilson, came back for the extra year, dealt with some injuries last year. This linebacking core at North Carolina State has the potential to be elite this year, and I really believe that. So, yes, the offense is good, and we're about to get into that, but this defense is going to keep them in every game they play. And one thing with season win totals and, just preseason bets in general, I tend to go in and just mark which games are absolutely locks for a win. Sure, there's no such thing as locks, but how many of these games can you just mark up as a win? How many of these games can you mark up as a loss? There's not one game North Carolina State's going to play this year that I see being a surefire loss. Okay, yeah, I went out on a limb and said they're going to go on the road and beat Clemson. I do see that being a winnable game. I mean, I've said this in past videos. I'm not high on DJ Uiagalelei. Clemson has a pretty easy start to the season, so might have some early success. But I think this game specifically, we're going to see the DJ Uiagalelei we saw last year. That game is going to fall on the arm of DJ Uiagalelei, and I'll take my chances there. They have another tough matchup in my mind with Florida State that next week coming back home. I wouldn't mark that up as a sure win either. But after that, at Syracuse, bye. Virginia Tech, Wake Forest, Boston College, back-to-back home games all at home. Think they win all those games. But could see them maybe dropping one at Louisville or at North Carolina to close the season. But at the end of the day, I think this team makes the ACC championship game. Devin Leary, I rate him as the top quarterback in the ACC entering this season. I mean, 35 touchdowns to just 5 interceptions last year. He takes care of the football, but he is a threat down the field. And I think so highly of this passing offense. He's got 2 huge weapons on the outside that should be able to create havoc against a lot of these secondaries in the ACC this year. The offensive line did lose their left tackle to the NFL draft, first-round pick, but other than that, they return all other 4 starters. It should be an effective unit once again. If North Carolina State can establish the run game, I feel even better about this. They do need to create more balance. I understand that. Didn't love what I saw from the run game last year, but with what they have in Leary, with what they have out wide, and certainly what they have at all 3 levels on defense, I think this team does win the conference. To have Clemson still be minus 120, minus 140, I mean, are we just going to ignore what we saw last year? We're getting over 8-1 on this. I think North Carolina State's a complete team. I'll sprinkle the third of a unit on this to win 2.5 units. That's how we're going to start off our season. Let's go. All right, now that we got that out of the way, I also have 2 season win total bets that I wanted to share with y'all. We'll start off with the bigger one, I guess. I mean, it's still, 3/4 of a unit, so it's not a huge play, but I think Virginia stays under their season win total at 7.5. I feel like -130 for that was a very reasonable price. It's not, I wouldn't say it's widely available. I saw 7.5, so like -150. That's personally not my style to lay that much juice, but I also saw some sevens out there with a better price. So I'm going to leave that up to y'all. I did see a few spots with -130, so I went ahead and grabbed that at the 7.5. Look, Virginia is one of those teams that I think a lot of, novice bettors are going to look at and say, oh, they got Brennan Armstrong. They're loaded at wide receiver. This is going to be a really good passing game. But what that neglects, I mean, this team on both the offensive line and the defensive line is atrocious. 0 returning starters on the offensive line. I mean, they're really going to be relying on 2 FCS transfers to be a ACC caliber, offensive line and go up against all these good defensive fronts they're going to face. No, thank you. And man, on that defensive line, I just do not see them being able to create havoc and get after the passer. So I hate this team up front on both sides of the ball. Their running game has just not been good in past seasons. Obviously first-year head coach Tony Elliott, he is more of a balanced guy coming over from Clemson. To be honest with you, I think they actually should just, stick with being a pass-first team. But, he's talked a lot about, we want to be balanced. With that offensive line and just not that much talent at running back, don't see that working out well. One other thing just about the makeup of this team, I hate their secondary. I think when they face a good passing offense, they're toast. So with all that being said, yeah, they got a good quarterback. Yeah, they got a good wide receivers, but that's going to deceive people from some of their deeper problems that they have. I mean, listen, week 2, they go to Illinois, who's really solid on both the offensive and defensive line. I mean, that's just a mismatch up front. That's going to be a game. I can already see this coming. Well, such a quarterback mismatch, this, that, but games are won and lost up front. And when you're as bad up front as this Virginia team is going to be, I mean, I could absolutely see them going to Champaign and dropping that game early in the season. Playing at home against Louisville. Why would I trust that defense to be able to stop Malik Cunningham? Louisville's got some things going for them defensively as well. That's not a surefire win. I think if anything, that's a toss-up game. Don't really see them beating Miami or North Carolina. Definitely don't see them beating Pitt. With how good Pitt's going to be in the front four, no, that Virginia's not winning that game. I'm sorry. And then from there, I mean, pretty tough finish to the season. You got Coastal Carolina, which is a tough non-conference game. Then you go on the road and play your rival in Virginia Tech. Suffice to say, I think this is a 5 or 6 win team. I actually err on the 5 and 7 side. I mean, listen, Tony Elliott was brought in for a reason. If this passing offense was going to carry them to success, then why didn't they last year? I mean, why were they so effective in the passing game but still went 6 and 6, right? 7.5. I mean, I thought that was crazy. With these season win totals, if my predictions are within, 1 win of that, I'm probably not going to, be inclined to play it. But, I'm seeing, a 1.5, maybe even a 2-win difference as to how I see this Virginia team. I'm playing this under all day. This will be the heavier of my season win total predictions. All right, and then on to my next play. Not as pessimistic here. I'm playing an over here on Florida State. This will just be a half-unit play. Florida State over 6.5 wins at -130. Look, the first 2 years have not gone well for Mike Norvell. They obviously went 5 and 7 last year, had a disastrous start, but I mean, if you handicapped every week of college football, if you watch them throughout that season, I mean, by halfway to and certainly the end of the season, that was not a 5-win caliber team. I mean, it clearly got better. I mean, it obviously crumbled early with that loss to Jacksonville State at home on that Hail Mary. Yikes! But they certainly got better throughout the year. I think it's an 8 or 9 win team. I really do. I'd say 8 and 4 to be safe, but hey, even if I'm a win off, then 7 and 5 wins this bet. So I did see some value here in the over on Florida State. I think Jordan Travis is extremely underrated. I mean, he was so valuable to Florida State last year that people just don't realize it. I mean, he was 5 and 2 as their starting quarterback. It went 0 and 5 without him. He's going to be healthier entering this year. He dealt with some injuries last year, which is obviously why he missed 5 games. But he's obviously great with his legs. I mean, over 500 yards each of the past 2 years. But as a passer, I mean, 63% completion, 8 yards per attempt. Mike Norvell can certainly win with that, especially considering Norvell is a guy that likes to pound the ground game. I mean, and this is a deep unit for Florida State. I really like this running back core for the Seminoles. And listen, they had quite a bit of success last year. And this is just an offense that I saw strides from all year. So now you have that continuity. It's year 3 of Norvell. I think this offense could certainly make some waves this year. I'm interested to see just how much the vertical passing game takes that next step this year. I mean, Norvell brought in a bunch of new wide receiver options. 4 Power 5 transfers. He's going to have plenty of options to work with. It's a 12-game season. I'm not even saying week 2 against LSU. This offense is going to be clicking on all cylinders. With that being said, I do think this is an underrated unit. They're good on the offensive line as well. As far as defensively, very good in their interior defensive line. I worry a little bit about pass rush. I mean, obviously lose Jermaine Johnson. That's a big loss. How can you duplicate that? But, I mean, their defense got so much better throughout last year. Did add some depth at linebacker, but the strength of this defense is their secondary. And I think it's a pretty big strength. Don't think a team like Wake Forest or a team like Miami is in any way just going to be able to throw the ball all over this defense. So I think there's a much more complete team than this number would indicate. I think it really just starts with Jordan Travis and then moves its way down. I think it's an 8-win team. As far as how I see that adding up, so they have a 2-game stretch early in the season where they play against LSU in New Orleans. I think that's a winnable game. And one advantage Florida State's going to have in that game, they play week 0. That last week of August, they play a tune-up game against Duquesne, whereas LSU doesn't. It's obviously a first year of a new coaching staff, lots of new pieces to integrate for Brian Kelly. So somewhat of an advantage for Norvell and the Seminoles. As long as Florida State starts the year off 2-1, I feel good about this. And if they go 1-2, it's not the end of the world. We got some wiggle room. Following that, they play Boston College and Wake Forest back-to-back weeks at home. Think they win both those games. I really do. I mean, I talked about it already. I like how Florida State's secondary is going to match up with that pass-happy Wake Forest offense. I think the balance of Florida State Florida State's a more complete team than Wake Forest in my mind. I'm chalking up North Carolina State as a loss. I already talked about how much I love North Carolina State this year. It's on the road in Raleigh, especially for the purposes of this bet. That's one I think you have to chalk up as a loss. Call me crazy. We saw Florida State be competitive against Clemson last year. I think Clemson's going to be about the same as they were last year. I think Florida State's gotten better. I think Florida State's going to give Clemson a run for their money. I'm counting that as a loss too for this, but wouldn't it all be surprised if Norvell and co. Strike a big one and beat Clemson at home? I really do. I think Clemson's a lot more vulnerable than people think. As far as the rest of the way, they'll beat Georgia Tech. I like the way they match up against Miami as well. I think they're a lot more physical up front on both sides of the ball. And then, like I said, do think Florida State secondary should be able to hold Tyler Van Dyke in check. Can't say the same about Miami's defense. I think Miami's defense will once again be a little bit leaky. Their linebacking core and just their run defense has been horrendous here in past seasons. Given how much I do love Florida State's running back room, plus Travis's ability as a runner, I actually do think Florida State will go into Miami and beat the Canes. From there, we do have a little bit of leeway at the end of the season. I think Florida State will beat Florida too. But, they do go on the road to Syracuse right after that Miami game. Could be a little bit of a letdown. I think Syracuse will be a weird team this year too. If they play how I think they're going to play and just kind of be an option team and really pound the ground game, I think that could throw some teams off, especially in some of those weirder spots. I'm not chalking that up as an automatic win, but I'm obviously not calling the upset either. Suffice to say, I think Florida State is an 8-4 team. I feel comfortable in that. If I'm a little bit wrong, 7-5, we still win this bet. I think there's a lot to like about the Noles this year. This is not a 6.5, 7-win team. I think it's an 8-4 team. Wouldn't be surprised if they're a 9-3 team. So that was my second season 1 total bet. I am high on Florida State this year. I do think Mike Norvell takes that next step, so I locked it in. Florida State over the 6.5 wins. All right, guys, you might have seen the logo here on the top right. You see the shirt I'm wearing here. We got the astronaut theme today. You might be wondering, how can I look like that? This is the peak male performance on my screen right now. Well, I'll tell you how. Proud 90 Golf. Unique polos, but very comfortable as well. If you go to proud90.com and browse their selection, they've obviously got a lot of unique styles like this. But if that doesn't float your boat, they still got the same comfortable polos and more traditional styles as well. They've also got t-shirts that are comfortable. If you want to start getting ready for the fall and winter, they got a great selection of hoodies and quarter zips. And I'll say this too, they recently added a women's line. So if you are a lady or you want to treat that special someone, Proud 90's got everything you need as far as golf apparel needs go. So here's what you do. You go to proud90.com or use the link in the description. If you see anything you like at checkout, it'll say discount code. Right as you enter your payment information at checkout, it'll say discount code. If you enter the code Fordham, you're going to get 15% off of your entire order. Code Fordham at checkout, proud90.com. gets you 15% off your order. Thank you to Proud90 for partnering up. Go support me. Go support Proud90. Once again, proud90.com. Let's get right back into the video. All right, on to some other just general predictions for the ACC this year. Starting with Clemson, I've been critical of Clemson. Their season one total is 10. I do think they go, 9-3, 10-2. I'm not going to play the under just because I do think there is a chance. I mean, it's Clemson. They've been stable for the last decade. If they can figure out some of their quarterback woes that they had last year, I don't think that's DJ Uiagalelei. I really don't. But if they can get Cade Klubnik integrated soon enough, I do think he is the better option. And a lot of people are going to get mad at that. I'm sorry. DJ Uiagalelei stunk last year, and it wasn't like, oh, he had a bad month or, he didn't step up in good games. He sucked the whole season, game 1 to game 13. I think he played good against Wake Forest. Do you want a cookie? I mean, come on. I mean, DJ Uiagalelei is not the guy to be leading a championship level team. So those are where most of my concerns with Clemson lay. I'll say this also, Tony Elliott obviously got the job at Virginia. Brent Venables got the job at Oklahoma. 2 new coordinators. That was one thing Dabo Swinney did well for so long, was keep all that continuity in his coaching staff and just kind of ran an old school program. They aren't going to have that luxury this year. This front four does have the potential to be elite, and I think that alone is going to win them quite a few games just in that. But like I said, lose 3 starters out of that secondary. I already said I think North Carolina State's going to go into Death Valley and win that game against Clemson. I think Clemson's somewhat vulnerable on the road against Florida State. As far as the rest of the season, though, I mean, they still got so many, games that I can just chalk up as wins. We'll see how they fare on the road in South Bend. I tend to think that they will get the job done in that game. Notre Dame should be good, but certainly by no means a playoff contender team here in year 1. I do like the way they match up against Miami. From a betting perspective, though, I just don't know how much there is to do with Clemson. I mean, are you going to lay -120 to -140 for them to win the conference? If you do, you need help. It's called 1-800-GAMBLER. No, I think they're 9-3, 10-2 team, but I don't think they're going to win this conference. All right, as far as Miami, there's obviously very high expectations for them this year. They're kind of priced right in that second tier behind Clemson to win this conference. I don't see that. I think North Carolina State is clearly the better team this year. Mario Cristobal is brought in for a reason. That's what people fail to, look at with these first-year head coaches. I mean, it's hard to bring in a whole new identity, a whole new system, and for it to just click right away. I could see them going 9-3, but I could also see them going 6-6 or 7-5. I mean, I'll tell you this: 0 chance they go into College Station and beat Texas A&M. They match up horribly with Texas A&M. Do expect their offensive line to get better throughout the season, but to expect in game 3 that they're going to be able to go up against a potentially elite defensive line that Texas A&M, no chance. Devin Achane in that A&M run game should be able to have its way with this Miami linebacking core. And also maybe one of the best secondaries in the country. So should be able to keep Van Dyke in check. We'll see how much better Miami's run game gets throughout the year. That was a weakness for them a year ago. I don't think Miami early in the season is just going to be ready to go on that stage and win that game. So I do chalk that up to basically an automatic loss. I think North Carolina at home is a toss-up game. On the one hand, there are some, on paper, I think Miami looks good in that matchup, but, it's still a Mack Brown coach team. I mean, do give Miami a slight edge, but don't think that's a surefire win by any means. I've already said, too, that I do think Florida State comes into Miami and beats the Canes. So I think that's probably another loss there, too. And then don't think they're going on the road and beating Clemson either. So I see them kind of as an 8-4 team. Might drop one of those other games along the way, too. What people also don't realize about first-year head coaches is what's so hard about it is, a guy like Mario Cristobal doesn't have his culture set in place yet. So there's a lot of these kind of guys, and I know this as good as anybody. I'm a Texas fan. I've gone through, 3 coaching changes in the, in less than, 10 years. So I've seen this time and time again. What happens, it's not about how you start, but once you get to those dog days of the season, not having that culture in place tends to have its effect. So I do think Miami is somewhat of a candidate to drop a game that on paper you don't think they would, maybe on the road against Virginia Tech. I mean, that's not an easy place to play by any means. I think Pittsburgh at home to end the year, we'll see where Miami is at that point. If they're not in contention for the ACC, think that's a very vulnerable spot for them as well. So I'm not going to play the season 1 total under, even though that's kind of my lean. You are getting it at plus money. I mean, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. I do like that higher with Mario Cristobal, but think he's got a little bit of ways to go to get this program back to realistically competing for an ACC title. As far as Pittsburgh, I mean, I think they're an interesting team. If you watch the quarterback tier ranking video, I'm not high on Keaton Slovis. I think that's a huge drop off, obviously, from Kenny Pickett to Keaton Slovis. They lose Jordan Addison, but I'm higher on this team than I initially was because, you know, football is about a lot more than just quarterback play. It's a lot more than passing game. And I've said this, but like amateur bettors just focus on, oh, who's the quarterback? You know, do they have a noteworthy wide receiver? And they play into storylines, but football is won in the trenches. And this, I mean, listen, this Pittsburgh defensive line could be the best in the country. I mean, second in sacks a year ago, you know, back seven, you know, could be shaky in certain spots, but when you have as good of a front four as they do, they're going to win games by that alone because there are some bad offensive lines in this conference. So I think the floor for this Pittsburgh team is a lot higher than I might have given it credit for. Yes, I have some concerns about how their offense adjusts to A, having a new quarterback, but B, having a new offensive coordinator with a completely different mindset. I mean, Frank Cignetti Jr. is much more of a run-first guy. You know, Pittsburgh hasn't had much success running the ball recently. Weren't a very good running team last year. And when they were, it's because they had a guy like Kenny Pickett who was so dangerous with his arm. You know, I think this is probably a 9-3 team this year. Could go either direction depending on just how quickly that offense adjusts to the new system. You know, I do give them the edge early in the season in that game over West Virginia. You know, I've thought about maybe taking, Pittsburgh's 7-point favorites in week one. Thought about taking the points there. I'll give them the slight edge there. They also got to play Tennessee the next week. So pretty tough start to the season. You know, could split those. I think Tennessee's probably the more dangerous game there. But I think West Virginia is an underratedly tough game. It's also a kind of a rivalry game too. Back to the backyard brawl. After that, though, I mean, Pitt's schedule, after those first two games at Western Michigan, then you have 3 straight home games against Rhode Island, Georgia Tech, and Virginia Tech. So if they just split those first 2 games, they should be 5-1 going into that bye week, middle of the season. Do have some tough road games at North Carolina and then at Miami to close the season. You know, I think Louisville is just another wild card as well. I mean, I'm going to talk about that in a second, but I do see a little bit of variance in how this season goes for Pitt. I think they lost a lot, obviously, from last year, and they're just going to be a different team. It's going to be a much more traditional Pat Narduzzi styled team, which is typically gross football, but sometimes it's winning football too. So season win total is at 8.5. I lean the over, but it's certainly not enough for me to play it. Should be an interesting team though. I'm not really high on Slovis, but just with what they have up front on both sides of the ball, should be more than capable of competing for this conference this year. All right, as far as Wake Forest, I mentioned this earlier. I mean, yes, they have experience at a lot of spots, starting with quarterback. I mean, Sam Hartman played a lot of football last year. Yeah, Wake Forest made the ACC title game, but they're not a complete team. Their linebackers are atrocious. I mean, go look at some of the rushing numbers defensively last year. Go watch the North Carolina game. Watch how Clemson was not a good offense last year, and they eviscerated this defense. I mean, I have those same concerns going into this year. Secondary is also young. I think they're okay up front, but don't love that defensive side of the ball. They're probably going to have to score to put up some pretty good numbers offensively to stay in some of these games. Yeah, they have Hartman. He's got a lot of receivers he's already worked with. Got a pretty good offensive line as well, but they're not a balanced team. I don't like this running game at all. That's going to have to take a next step for them this year if they're going to want to be competitive in some of these games. Until I see it, I can't really, feel that that's going to happen. So I think there's 3 surefire losses for Wake Forest this year. Clemson, I really think they're going to lose that Florida State. I mean, if you look at how each of those units match up, Florida State's the more complete team there. And I also don't think they're going to go on the road and beat North Carolina State either. That being said, there's quite a few surefire wins as well. I mean, really easy non-conference schedule. BMI at Vanderbilt. I think Liberty is, definitely not the same team without Malik Willis. Should start the year 3-0 relatively easily. Really easy end of the season as well. You get Syracuse and Duke to end the season. It'll be interesting to see how they play against a team like North Carolina. I mean, that was just a complete mess of a game last year. And then I'll say it again, Louisville. I mean, complete wild card. I think Malik Cunningham really is the most high upside quarterback in the ACC. So the season win total was at 8. I count 3 surefire losses. Kind of have to account for another one, maybe Louisville, North Carolina. Boston College is another team we'll talk about, but wouldn't be surprised if they beat Wake Forest either. So I think 8's actually the perfect number for them. I think there's 3 surefire losses on there and probably one more as well. Just not a complete team. Don't think we see Wake Forest back in the ACC championship this year. North Carolina is a team. I have a lot of respect for Mack Brown. Obviously, My worry about North Carolina is if you go 6-7 with Sam Howell as your quarterback, how are you going to run it back and expect a better team with either Drake May or Jacoby Criswell? I mean, I think both those guys can be good options, but I think very highly of Sam Howell. The reality of it is North Carolina won't be a contender until they get better up front. Their offensive line was atrocious last year. Atrocious. That's how you go 6-7 with a guy like Sam Howell as your quarterback. It's as simple as that. So they definitely got to get better up front. But, they have some weapons on the outside. I like how Mack Brown has used his running back so far at North Carolina. He brought back Gene Chizik as his defensive coordinator. So trying to rekindle some of that old Texas magic. I could see them being better, but I feel like a lot of it is hope-based. We're going to have to see their young secondary actually perform until we give them credence. So, as far their win total is at 7.5, and it's actually juiced heavily to the under. So you're kind of taking a stand by expecting North Carolina to go 8-4 this year. Sneakily tough game early in the season at Appalachian State. That's a very experienced Appalachian State team. You've got a good quarterback in Chase Bryce. They've got a really good run game. It's going to come down to just how those teams match up front. But could be a loss early in the season that I think a lot of people might not expect. I think Notre Dame and then at Miami are just two toss-up games. I mean, both teams with first-year head coaches. We'll see how they look early in the year. If Mack Brown probably splits those games, should be happy with that. I don't love how they match up with Wake Forest. I think you got to kind of lean towards a loss there. And then with Pitt and North Carolina, I mean, they do get North Carolina State at the end of the season at home. A very tough game for North Carolina State. Obviously a rivalry game, but I just don't like the way they match up front with either one of those teams. So, I somewhat lean to the over. There's just a lot of question marks with this team, but I mean, I feel like Mack Brown at this point has probably established himself as a trustworthy guy. And we're not asking them to go win the national championship, but we're asking them to win 8 games. So I lean towards the over, especially getting a plus 115 return. I do like that. It's just a team with a lot of question marks. We'll see how the quarterback battle shakes out, and we'll see how some of those question marks, both up front and then in their secondary, stack up, because they're going to have to get all 3 of those question marks solved. All right, I mentioned it multiple times already, but Louisville's a team I'm so conflicted on. On the one hand, they got a guy, Malik Cunningham. I couldn't be higher on this guy. He's shown so many strides already throughout his career. The only thing that's really plagued him is turnovers, and he improved on that mightily last year. He's great with his legs. He's very underrated with his arm. 9 yards per attempt last year. So I love that about this team. So I see a win total at 6, and I'm like, how could I not bet that? But at the same time, I worry a little bit just about, I'm not a storyline guy necessarily. Like, I don't buy into a lot of the public narratives around, betting and all that. But Scott Satterfield, it hasn't gone well for him at Louisville. His best year was his first year. And then, after that 2020 season, when, he basically, was saying, I want to go to South Carolina, didn't get received well by the fan base. And I think that even spilled over into last year. Suffice to say, they got to get off to a good start. Tough start to the season. You play at Syracuse week 1. I think Syracuse is of a weird team this year, so we'll see how that goes. But then next week at Central Florida, and then you come home and play Florida State. So I think there's a lot of volatility in how the beginning of this season goes. And I think if they start the year 1-2, this team could be toast, even with a really good quarterback. And once again, I'm not a big storyline guy, but we're going to find out a lot about this Louisville team here in the first month of the season. To be honest with you, I could see them beating a team like Pitt. I could see them beating Wake Forest. Maybe they go on the road at the end of the year and beat Kentucky. They do have a very tough close of the season. At Clemson, North Carolina State, at Kentucky. Very tough beginning and end of the season. I do like what they have in the run game. They've obviously lost a lot of talent on the outside at wide receiver, but do think Cunningham being so experienced and just how highly I think of him, don't really mind that necessarily. I think they're underrated up front as well. 2 questions I have for them defensively. How does their interior defensive line stack up? Because even early in the season, in some of those first 3 games, they're going to have to hold up front. And then I also, it's not really a worry, but it's a question mark. They got a lot of veteran DBs in the transfer portal, but how do those guys gel together immediately? So I think there's a lot of variance in this team. Like I said, if they can start the year 2-1 and maybe even 3-0, this is a team to watch out for. But if they go 1-2, I wouldn't say things are so well placed right now. Things could fall apart for Louisville pretty quickly. We actually saw that happen with Bobby Petrino's last year. So It's happened before. We'll see. I think Louisville is a total wild card going into this 2022 season. All right, Boston College. I'd say this is another interesting team too. I think a lot of what Jeff Hafley wanted to do last year was kind of thrown out the window when Phil Jurkovec got hurt. Luckily for him, Jurkovec is back this year, and really this offense has got some pieces. They got Phil Garwo back, running back, 1,000-yard rusher from a year ago. I like their wide receiving core led by Zay Flowers, who's an absolute electric factory. So they do have some things working for them. They had the third best pass defense in America last year, but the issue is 92nd run defense. So very large disparity there. That doesn't tend to bode well early in the season when you go up against a team like Florida State in Tallahassee, who can run the ball and it's very versatile offense. Also basically takes them out of the equation of beating a team like Clemson. So, two surefire losses that I see going into the year. Really interesting beginning to the season too. They play Rutgers and then at Virginia Tech. I'm not really all that high on either one of those first two teams, but it's also not the easiest, early season competition. So luckily do have some really easy games towards the end of the season. They get the luxury of playing UConn this year. With the way that they stopped the pass at an elite rate last year, could match up well with a team like Wake Forest. But do I really expect them to go on the road and beat Notre Dame and South Bend? Not really. So seeing the win total at 6.5, I think that's about right. I actually like Jeff Hafley. I like what he's built there so far. And do think this program has potential moving forward. That being said, think this number is probably about right for him. Virginia Tech, with their season win total at 6, another team with a first-year head coach, Brent Pry, coming in from as the Penn State defensive coordinator. Listen, I really debated playing their season win total under because I think it's another team. They are horrible up front on both sides of the ball. I mean, their offensive line, they have no depth. And I just don't like some of the talent there right now. And then I think probably more concerning is their front four defensively. I think it could be alarmingly bad. I'm talking about like worse than the ACC bad, worse than the Power 5 bad. So don't like that about this team. That being said, I do think that Grant Wells transferring in from Marshall is a guy that as the season goes on, because it's going to take him some time, new system, obviously a new place. It's going to take him some time to acclimate with some of his receivers, but I did like some of the talent that Brent Pry brought in on the outside. The running game is not great, but I think that there's at least dependability there early in the year. It's not going to be great, but it's not going to be poor either, I'd say. A lot of these games that I think they'll have a chance in, but I also think they're vulnerable early in the season against a team like Boston College, against a team like West Virginia. Don't think there's any way that they're going to go on the road and beat Pitt. Which is how much of a mismatch there is up front on both sides of the ball. Same thing can be said about North Carolina State. This bet might come down to late in the season. They play Liberty and Virginia to end the season. I think these are two winnable games. I wouldn't be surprised if we see this Virginia Tech team struggle early in the year, but as Wells gets acclimated to this new system, I think this team could get better throughout the year. Brent Pry is obviously a defensive guy as well. Maybe he can pull some strings and figure some of those issues out up front. I do lean towards the under. I think this is probably a 5-7 team. I think Brent Pry's got some ways to go. I mean, Justin Fuente basically ran that program into the ground. I didn't have enough conviction to play it. That being said, both teams in Virginia don't expect much from them this year. Georgia Tech, yikes. I mean, it's year 4 of Jeff Collins, and this team still has basically the same issues they had early on. I mean, it was understandable when Collins inherited a bunch of guys who were used to running the triple option. Just wasn't a modern style built team, but it's year 4 and they still got the same problems. I'm not very high on them this year. I will say, I mean, Jeff Sims does have some upside, just hasn't shown anywhere near enough consistency to where I feel good about that entering this year. Even if Sims does take that next step, I mean, this team just has too many glaring holes. First of all, they lost Jahmyr Gibbs, who is a game-changing running back. And, Jeff Collins did try to bring in some guys from the portal to kind of counteract that loss. But, don't think that you're going to be able to replicate a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs. Their wide receivers are young and unproven. Don't like that. The offensive line could be rough once again. I think they could be good against the run, but I have a lot of questions as how they're going to fare against the pass. Both getting after the quarterback and then a very inexperienced secondary as well. Don't think that they're going to beat Clemson week 1. Hot take here. They also play Ole Miss week 3 at UCF week 4. Probably going to lose both of those games too. I see no way they go on the road and beat Pitt. No way they go on the road and beat Florida State. No way they go on the road and beat North Carolina, and no way they go on the road and beat Georgia. So they're just going to be overmatched in a lot of these games. For them to win 4 games, got to beat Virginia. Probably going to need to beat one of Virginia Tech or Miami, which is not an easy task. I mean, I think Virginia Tech's certainly the more realistic option there. So, I mean, I'm not going to spend all day dogging on Jeff Collins, but I was actually somewhat hopeful as to how he would build that program. It's just not going fast enough. And, it's year 4 and you still have the same problems. They just haven't shown much progress. So, it could be another rough year for Georgia Tech fans. All right, Syracuse, this is a do or die year for Dino Babers. Essentially, if they don't make a bowl game, he's almost certainly gone from Syracuse. He obviously won 10 games back in 2018, but things haven't been as kind to him since then. I think he's got an interesting team this year, though. Garrett Schrader, his quarterback, not a good passer. With that being said, nearly 800 yards on the ground last year. If you pair him with a guy like Sean Tucker, who is a true freshman, just lit up the ACC last year at running back, I think this run game can be pretty effective this year. I think Dino Babers should actually lean into the fact we're not going to be a good passing team. We probably don't have what it takes up front to protect our quarterback. Let's just lean into the fact that we are a run-only team. I don't love what they have on their front 4, but if they can just kind of exceed my expectations there, I think their linebackers are solid, and I think their secondary is actually pretty underrated as well. I think they'll go on the road and beat UConn, certainly. Have a game against Wagner, so that's a win. I think they could be pretty competitive against a team like Virginia early in the season, still trying to get its feet wet, and it has a lot of holes. I mean, I obviously bet Virginia under the 7.5 wins, so I'd love that. I think there's a lot of teams later in the season. I mean, just going down the list at who they play the last 5 games: Notre Dame, at Pitt, Florida State, at Wake Forest, at Boston College. I don't know if they really get blown out in any of those games. I mean, maybe a team like Wake Forest, who you can really take the top off of you. We're going to find out game 1. They play at home against Louisville. So if it were me, though, run the football. And then, if it's 3rd and 7, run the football because you can't throw the ball. So I'm interested to see how Dino Babers deploys his guys here in 2022. All right, last team here. We got Duke. Could be, I mean, I don't know how many Duke football fans there are. Obviously, basketball school. First year of Mike Elko. He's obviously got a tall task ahead of him. As I look at their offense, I don't see one glaring hole, but I think there's a big talent gap between Duke and what they have versus what a lot of these other teams in the ACC have. So I think that's their disadvantage offensively. As far as defensively, though, it's clear. Their pass defense is going to be terrible. I mean, this is the worst secondary in the conference. I don't like their linebacking core as well. Their defense is going to be atrocious this year. And the only game I can chalk up as a surefire win is against North Carolina A&T. I mean, playing at home against Temple week 1, should win that game because Temple's not in a good place either. Also play at Northwestern and at Kansas. 2 teams that had horrible years last year, but still, I think each of those teams probably does beat Duke. I mean, Duke's season win total is at 3 for a reason, guys. And that considers that they do play Temple and North Carolina A&T early in the season. The reality of it is I just don't think they have the Jimmies and Joes to stack up with most of the teams in the rest of this conference. So I know people that see those very low numbers, like I think we saw 1.5 from Kansas last year. Yes, it did cash, but I just don't. I'm not the type of guy that's gonna buy super low on a team like Duke. So that's really all the time I'm gonna spend on them. Probably going to be a 2-10 or 3-9 team. Hey, if they go 4-8, then congrats, you won your bet. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today's episode. Thank you all for watching. I think the ACC is interesting this year. I mean, for the last decade or so, it's basically been Clemson's conference. Call me crazy. I just don't see that being the case anymore. I think that dynasty has kind of run its course. I really think a team like NC State is going to make some noise in the conference this year. We'll see who else does. I obviously bet. I'll go through my bets one more time. NC State to win the ACC, got that at plus 830. Just risking 0.3 units on that to win about 2.5. And then my 2 season win totals were Virginia under the 7.5 wins, then Florida State over the 6.5 wins. So 3 plays overall here in the ACC. Appreciate everybody tuning in. I'll be back here later this week with the Big Ten predictions episode. It'll be the same format. As I said, I go through all my bets first, and then I'll just give you a brief breakdown of all the other teams as well. So, like I said, thank you for watching. If you liked the video, please feel free to leave a like. That would really help the growth of this channel, what I'm trying to build here. On that same note, please subscribe as well so you won't miss any of my upcoming content. You can also follow me on Twitter at Fordham Betting. That is my main platform we're deep in the weeds of Major League Baseball right now, but college football is my main sport. I'm going to have tons of betting content on here and on my Twitter here throughout the month, and then certainly in the season. So with that being said, guys, I'll see y'all here in a few days. Appreciate y'all watching. And yeah, I'll see you on the flip side.